What do you say to those who point out that it seems wrong to vote in favour of having a referendum on an issue and then opposing implementing the result because the result didn't go the way you wanted to? And if the party followed you along that logic, surely we'd lose a lot of connection with our working class grassroots voters that voted to leave.
There are a couple of points there. The first thing is, I think it's quite clear. I voted to the second reading of Article 50. I voted to trigger it because I genuinely believe that you had to respect the outcome of the referendum, which was to leave the European Union, and triggering Article 50 was a very painful for me part of that process, and I got a lot of stick for voting for it, but I thought it was the right thing to do because I had 40% of my constituents who did vote leave, or 40% of the turnout of that referendum result. And so it's important to do that. And then in the debate that happened with the amendments that we put down, i.e. to give Parliament a final say on the deal that comes back and a number of other things about EU citizens and so on, I thought that was an opportunity for the government to say, okay, thank you for voting to trigger Article 50 at the second reading. Now, we understand you're not happy. Well, let's try and find a compromise as to how this should look, how Brexit should look, what the relationship will be with the EU, what the relationship will be with the single market, all of those things, and the rights of EU citizens and so on and so forth. And at the end of that process, when we come back, we'll ensure that we will give Parliament a sovereign right to have a final say, a meaningful say on that deal. And I thought that was worth going through the amendment stage. As it turned out, the government basically threw all of that out and said it's our way or the highway, and Parliament will have no meaningful vote. So in that sense, many of the people who voted leave voted to take back control. But take back control where? To hand it to the executive? No, to take back control and give it to the sovereign body of this country, which is Parliament. And that's not what the government were offering. So I think in that sense, you have to be quite clear what was on the table wasn't necessarily what was on the tin during the referendum. And I think it was quite right, given what my majority of my constituents had said, and what I think was right as a matter of principle, to vote the way I did, which is that actually, no, we shouldn't be triggering Article 50 under those conditions. But the other issue is this, this referendum was, in many ways, a complete and utter cock-up from start to finish. David Cameron, I think most people will understand that if David Cameron and George Osborne had any idea about how this would end up, they wouldn't have done it in the first place. And if they had decided to do it in the first place with a real prospect that they could lose, I think most people understand it would have been a two-stage process. There would have been a binary in-out of the EU referendum, followed by a second referendum, which would have been on the terms of the withdrawal. Do we in the single market? You just look at it, it's such common sense. But no, they just had one. There was no minimum threshold, no of turnout, or anything like that. It was simply something they thought would shoot their UKIP fox and the leavers in their own party, sort out the Tory party's problems, and instead they've created a constitutional and foreign policy crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetimes. So I think what's happening now is lots of politicians, including Theresa May and the government, are all trying to interpret what a very vague vote to leave the EU now looks like. And that's part of the problem. Theresa May was saying, no Brexit, no deal is better than a bad deal, etc., etc. Well, actually, she's called that election, and what you have seen is that a large number of the people who voted leave at the referendum voted for Labour's position, which is certainly, I think, different to where the Tories were going with their hard Brexit before the election was called. I think we need more clarity in the Labour Party as to what our position is. I understand that we went in with a little bit of a fudge in the election, and that worked out really well, and I get that. And I stand corrected. I thought actually having that fudge was bad. I thought we should stick, nail our colours to the mast. But actually it worked out pretty well, pretty good. And people voted not just on leave, on remain, they voted on security, they voted on jobs, they voted on what they thought their future, on hope, some people would say. And I think that has shown people that this debate on the future of our country doesn't just have to come down to immigration or not, but it can also be about issues of security. And I think that's critical because it showed us that actually ultimately at the bottom of it all, security and the economy is what people are voting on. And that might have manifested itself in terms of the referendum, but actually as a party we came up with policies and a manifesto of hope, and I think that had an impact.